Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching my podcast. I'm Arup K. Chatterjee, and with me here is my friend from the Philippines, Rhodora Magan. And Dr. Rhodora Magan, it's a pleasure to have you on my show. How have you been?
I've been looking forward to this day. There is a hiatus for everybody who knew both of us a few months ago doing bilateral view. This is the comeback, and I thought that this is awesome that we are back again. Because you see, there are a lot of things we have to do as professors, and yeah, everything's great by God's grace.
Great. So, those of you who do not know Professor Rhodora Magan, she is a professor at Cebu Tech University in the Philippines. And Professor Rhodora Magan in the year 2024 was also a Naveen Jindal Fellow. And I had the pleasure and, dare I say, also the privilege of being her supervisor or her mentor for a very important paper that Dr. Magan wrote. And that paper was arguably the launching pad for a podcast series that she and I started, which is known as Bilateral View. And we certainly have plans of resuming it hopefully soon. But as of now, today, we would very much like to hear from Dr. Magan about her experiences while writing the paper, which is under question today. And this paper is titled The Ramayan of the Maranao. Now, I'm guessing a lot of people will require no definition of the Ramayana. It's an epic authored by sage Valmiki, arguably 2,500 years ago, maybe even prior to that. But who are the Maranao? What are the Maranao, Dr. Magan? And why, indeed, is there a connection between the Maranao and an Indian epic known as Ramayana?
All right. First of all, I have to tell everybody that I really appreciate Professor Chatterjee for taking me in. When I arrived in India last year, it was in June, very scorching June. And I was thinking, what could be in store for me in June in India? Okay, it's my first time to be in the beautiful country of India. And thank God, because he gave me a very intelligent professor, Professor Chatterjee, who guided me all the way through. And that's the reason why we sort of came up with this beautiful understanding about how people should be profiled in such a way that there's this understanding of the current politics of the country and how these two things are, coming together. Say the Maranao people, as Professor Chatterjee said, these are one of the inhabitants in the Philippines. I'm a Filipina. The Maranaos too are Filipinos. You see, there's the single quotation marks on both ends because up until now, there is this ongoing discussion as to whether or not there's this, permission that these Maranao people or the Muslim people in general are giving the entire archipelago so that they could be one, with the nation. And that would mean exactly whether or not there's this perfect union between the Muslims and the Christians in the Philippines as an archipelago, a very clear, combination of or assemblage of islands, which in my study, I realized it's actually not an archipelago, but an aquapelago. It's very important that I have to, highlight on this one.
Yeah, sorry for the interruption. We'll come to that. I'll request you to hold that about archipelagos and aquapelagos because I will go into that. But for now, could you please focus on what you were speaking about the Maranao? And I thought you were on the verge of saying something very important about the present context.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So earlier I spoke of the Maranao people as one of the Muslim tribes. Okay, because in my study I realized that there's this migration that happened. You see, my country is at the crossroads. Geographically, it's at the crossroads. So we are called the gateway to the Pacific. So you could just imagine that being at the center. What are the confluences? What are the combinations? What are the permutations? If this were a mathematical set, what are the permutations about my country, about myself, about the people living in my country? So there's Hinduization, the first wave. These are the people from India, from Hindustan, the old name of India, of course. And they came to various parts of Southeast Asia. And of course, my country is in Southeast Asia, very specifically in the Malay archipelago, consisting of 3 countries, Indonesia, Philippines, and of course Malaysia. And apart from Hinduization, you also have Islamization or Mohammedization. So we have the Muslims also coming in, and all these travelers are, following the oceanic sea routes.
If
Yeah,
I
go
could
ahead.
interrupt Dr. Magan, I apologize. When do you think the Hinduization sort of ended? Because I'm guessing my educated guess would be it might have started around the 10th or the 11th century, if not slightly later. But when do you think the Hinduization ended, or did it ever end? And when did Islamization start?
Okay, well, we can only refer to books that are available. And these books are basically telling us it's between 14th and 15th century. But we know exactly that, prior to the 14th century, 5th century, 6th century, going up to the 14th century, yes, there was this very active Hinduization, which overlapped with Islamization. And as to when did it stop, there's really no answer to that, because if I say that it stops probably somewhere between 14th and 15th century when the Muslims came over, we don't actually have a way of verifying it. Or even if we could verify it, because there's a book telling it, to be so, there's a very difficult problem at the middle, because when we talk about overlapping cultures, there's no end to the overlapping. There's no end to the imbrication that has to continue if 2 cultures are very actively engaged. And if the people also in that new culture likes it. In fact, we have a lot of Hindu words in the country. We have a lot of practices, that are very much Indic, that are very, very reflective of, the Hinduization that happened a few years back before the Muslims came. So I'm talking about the hybrid culture in my country. We have mountains here named after, say, Laon Khan, for instance, Khan Laon, that is Lord Laon, right? And that's in Negros area. And we have, before the Spaniards came, we have the Rajas, the leaders. And again, this is a very Hindu concept. In terms of food, okay, Gestra mythology, we have betel nut and chewing, just very famous in my country, which is now vanishing. It's also very Indic. The influence is coming from India, from South Asia. More than those things, we have, say, kebab, and you have also salukara, which is very famous in some parts of the Philippines, in Samar area. So, and now to answer the question whether or not it has ever stopped, well, until now, because we're still having these things, then it has never stopped at all. So it has continued.
You're suggesting that Islamization probably started around the 14th century, which is also, roughly the time when a second wave of Islamization might have started in places like Ceylon, then Ceylon, or Sri Lanka, and certain other parts of Southeast Asia. Now, let's come back to the Maranao. Once again, Dr. Magan, if you don't mind jogging our memory, who are the Maranao? And who are they in the current context? And is there anything to do with the various disputes, if I can use that word without sounding offensive, the various, say, kinds of marine real estate issues that the Philippines and the Malay archipelago in general is engaged in? So who are the Maranaos? What's their current position in the Filipino landscape? And is there a relationship they have with the various maritime real estate affairs of the Malay archipelago?
Okay, when I conducted the study, I found a lot of things about these Maranao people. Essentially, they were from the mountains. And there's this eruption of Mount Makaturing. In my study, I realized, okay, this is one of the reasons why they were able to decide on living somewhere other than the place that they were before, because of the catastrophe, the natural catastrophe that happened to them. So they had to really migrate somewhere down there. So the coastal places are so available for them. And that's the reason why the Maranao people, forced to flee from their homes, have to find this new livelihood, new place, new space. Yeah, sorry.
Was this northern Philippines that they came from? Was it North Philippines that they came from?
Okay, like I said, these are the people coming from this particular part of the country, very far from the sea. And this eruption of Mount Nakaturing is not so known to everybody. I only even realized this when I arrived in India during my research, because our history books never quite mentioned about this mass migration of the Maranaos. During this time. And I only came across a couple of studies as well done by academics from North America, from Europe, talking about this eruption of Mount Makaturing in this highland, in this space where the volcano is situated, so that, like I said, they were forced to flee because survival is very necessary. So finding a new spot on the coast of Sulu Archipelago, so we're not talking about Sulu Archipelago, where these Maranaos, Magindanaos, these Tausug people, these tribes, very hardcore Muslims, could be found.
Could you give us a very brief kind of understanding of the geography of Philippines? When you say, talk about the Sulu Archipelago, which part of Philippines is it? And the mountain that the Maranao were originally located in, which part is that located?
Okay, so we're just in one place talking about this migration. This is happening in one island in the country. So Philippines is composed of 3 major islands. We have Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So we have the smallest one, Visayas, where I'm in. And of course, we have the second biggest, Mindanao, where we situate the Maranaos and their original place before they had to flee because of the volcano eruption. And we have the biggest one, Luzon, where you have Imperial Manila, where you have the capital city there. And we have the metropolis as well. So this is how fragmented my country is, fragmented in the sense that there are waters in between. We have the riverine system. We have the aquatic spaces and the land spaces. So land and sea, you have the confluence of the land and sea in the archipelago. And you have this 7,107 islands, 7,000 plus, as many history books would say, that comprise the country. So it's really, really very fragmented. And you see, if you have as many islands as 7,000, you could also imagine...
Dr. Magan, sorry, I don't think you realize the importance of what you're saying. Did you just say Philippines is 7,000 plus islands? Yes.
Exactly.
So I think we need to calibrate that. 7,000 plus islands. That is your country.
Yes, yes. Yes.
And it's divided into 3 big chunks of seems like land as a thing. Am I right?
Yes.
Right. Please go on.
Right. So, every kid in my country has this knowledge that, you live in a space with 7,107 islands. That was the figure, the exact figure we got in grade 1. And over time, we have these books writing about the Philippines comprised of 7,000 plus. There's the hedge there, the plus, just to, maintain the idea that there could be more along the way. There could be more islands along the way. So imagine the 7,107 grouped into 3 major groups. So one major group has several islands still within it, okay? And for instance, Luzon, you have a lot of the islands there that comprise the Luzon quality, and a lot of islands, reflecting the Mindanao quality, and a lot of islands as well reflecting the Visayas quality or the Visayan quality. And so this is the picture that we are talking about. The Maranaos are in the second biggest in Mindanao. And you see, Mindanao and Visayas are very close to each other. That's the reason why you could understand why these 2 islands understand each other well, because Cebuano, as the major language of 2 islands, is very much prominent compared to, of course, the official language is prominent, but when I say prominent, it's like a sort of prominence that is not being forced, right? The kind of prominence that is not being instituted, because our official language, which is Filipino, based on Tagalog, is very much spoken among people in Luzon area, which the people in Visayas and Mindanao do not resonate with. So I go back to the idea of prominence, which is not forced upon us, not even instituted because there's the constitution saying that this has to be the national language. It's just very authentic, very original, that we understand each other because of that kind of prominence of the Cebuano language, Cebuano Visayan language. Because again, Mindanao and Visayas are quite close to each other, and based on the map, it's like a camel, the shape of a camel with the leg resting. So that's the figure of the Philippines in the Pacific, and that's why we call ourselves the gateway to the Pacific, because it's like we are the ones to welcome first the tsunamis and the typhoons and all the calamities out there. And it's so crucial to be living in my country. But here are the Maranao people, never afraid to find their new space in a new vision about themselves. So from being farmers, they moved to the coastal areas. So you can just imagine, from farming to fishing. And this is now the picture that I got when I did my study, that these are the Maranao peoples who are forced to be doing for their livelihood. So from farming, they go for fishing. And because they have to be fishermen now, they really have to love their new job. They have to love their new being, their new self, because they have to adapt to their environment. The sea dictates what to do. Their new environment teaches them what to do to survive. So, like I said earlier, the Maranao people, alongside these major Muslim groups like the Tausug, the Magindanaons, are located in Mindanao. But very specifically, we are targeting Sulu Archipelago, which is the specific site in my study, where these Maranao people are found after this volcano eruption. So many of them migrated to Sulu Archipelago, and please know that Sulu Archipelago is originally inhabited by the Tausugs, one of the major Mohammedan groups in the country. So they originally peopled Sulu Archipelago, and earlier I spoke of Islamization. So this was the first area being Islamized or majorly affected by the migration of the Muslims coming from Brunei, through the oceanic routes. So you could imagine that, you are now sort of invading a new place. But let's just treat the word invading in a very positive way, because in the course of my study, I realized that this sort of invasion also positively impacted the economy of Sulu Archipelago. So Sulu Archipelago is another confluence of people. Within this very tiny Sulu Archipelago or assemblage of islands, you have a lot of or different types of people there coming from neighboring islands. And you see, when I talk about neighboring islands, you can now imagine that Malaysia is also a neighbor, and Indonesia is also a neighbor, and all the other places like Taiwan, etc., etc. So mentioning that, there's now this amplification of the proximity of Malaysia, or we have this term Sabah, North Borneo, aka Sabah, and of course it's part of Malaysia now. So that is being focalized in my study, because when I traced the roots of these Maranao people as people coming from not just the Philippines, but also these Muslims coming from other neighboring islands, which are also part of Malaysia and Indonesia, you could really tell that they're so hybrid in a way that you don't really call them Filipinos, because the word Filipino only emerged when the Spaniards colonized the country in honor of King Philip. So really, there was no Filipino prior to the Spanish colonization. And this is very important, because so then the question is, how do you call the Filipinos prior to the arrival of the people of King Philip, right?
Right.
You now have a very nameless character. And had this been a story, it's a nameless character. I was like imagining now Catherine Mansfield's The Fly, where there's no name for that particular character. So if you look at these people now living in the country prior to the Spanish colonization, you have nameless people, peopling Sulu Archipelago, peopling Visayas area, peopling Luzon area. So that's just how the nameability works in this whole conversation. I don't know how people would react to this one, but really in my study, I never found any name for the Filipinos. You can just say transient people, because everyone technically came from other parts of these archipelagos, which are close to the Philippines. So
if I could pull the threads very quickly, Dr. Magan. Now, there are lots of wonderful loose threads hanging in what you've said. You went on a very wonderfully fluid journey from what seems a bit like northern Philippines to southern Philippines. Although I know that's not exactly it's not as linear as that. But you're saying that the Maranao were people located roughly in the north, and they've come down to the Sulu archipelago, and the Sulu archipelago was originally inhabited by Muslims, and the Maranao are also Muslims. But these are two different ethnic stock of Muslim population, and maybe they are both inhabitants of Muslim culture, but ethnically they could be pretty diverse. And the Maranao were mainly farmers. They were involved in agriculture, green agriculture. From they have had to shift their profession to blue agriculture, blue harvest, blue economy.
Yeah.
They've come to see. So I'm guessing this happens around the 17th or the 18th century, if I'm not wrong. Or correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And you are
17th around.
You're also suggesting that there's something, something in the geopolitics of Philippines, something in the international relations of Philippines that the Maranao and the Tausug, or the reverse order, the Tausug first, and then the Maranao have got involved with. And you mentioned the Sabah conflict or the Sabah dispute. So what is the Sabah dispute? We'll come to that in a bit. You remember I also asked you to pause regarding Aquapelago, to which I will come very, very shortly. But coming back to the title of your paper, Dr. Magan, it's a very important paper, I reiterate. The Ramayan of the Maranao. So you've told us who the Maranao are. And now what is this whole Ramayan business doing in Philippines? Because you told me, and I, from whatever experience of reading, meeting people, etc., nobody has discounted the fact that the Philippines is a Catholic state. It's a Catholic nation. Yes, the national identity is pretty belated. It's not very old. It's not 1,000 years old yet, but it's a Catholic state with a good Muslim population and maybe remainder of Buddhist and Hindu, but those are minority. So in a Catholic state, within the Muslim population, what is a quote-unquote Hindu epic, if I use that word Hindu in a geocultural sense? What is the Ramayan doing among the Maranao? And is the Ramayan of the Maranao indeed any different from the Ramayan that we know in general?
Okay. Right. I was surprised as well, finding this very important detail in my study. So what is the Ramayan doing in my country, in the Sulu archipelago? So don't forget that I told you earlier that there is this Hinduization prior to the Mohammedization in the country. So we could tell that, in this transportation of, or in the transfer of knowledge, okay, Ramayan, for instance, being very, very huge and epic in India, would have been also, transmitted to the archipelago, because there's no way for Ramayan not to be transmitted to this archipelago, which is the main, the main stop for these kings and businessmen, who would want to do a good life in the country or in the Philippine Islands or in the group of islands before it became Philippines. So the Ramayan was not only transmitted to the Philippines, but also in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in many parts of Southeast Asia, because you see, there are a lot of versions for the Ramayan. That's why I began my study with a question, how many Ramayans are there? And I sort of introduced there the idea of A.K. Ramanujan saying there are more than 300 versions of Ramayan. So that's the reason why I'm very interested to look into the very version of the Philippines about the Ramayan. And it's not Ramayan, it's entitled, the title is Maharaja Lawana. So the main character is Maharaja Lawana. So that's a very name as well of the story, the Ramayan version that is very much upheld by the Maranao people. The story of Maharaja Lawana is part of the Darangan mythology, this very long stretch of stories for the Maranaos, and one of which is Maharaja Lawana, where the character is Maharaja Lawana, okay? The character here, which is not having the same strength as, of course, the main character in Ramayan, who is revered by many Hindu or by many Indian people because of his prowess and everything. The opposite guy, Ravan, is the one being vilified. In the Maharaja Lawana version, it is the opposite, okay? So it's Ravan, which is, of course, the vilified character in Ramayan, being worshipped now by the people. Sorry. So this Ravana is so named Maharaja Lawana in the Philippine version, and Raja Magandiri is, of course, the counterpart of the main character in Ramayan. So it's the opposite that happened in my country's version. So you could ask why. And essentially, that was the question that I also asked before continuing in my study, because it's very, very striking that a huge epic like Ramayan is being inverted. It's deconstructed, and for what reason? So that made me really ask a lot of things about who the Maranao people are, and why are they doing this deconstruction of the big story Ramayan, which is also deconstructed in many parts of Southeast Asia. So it's not just Philippines deconstructing Ramayan, but also many parts of Southeast Asia. In my study, I realized that these people during the time call it creative amplification, to, localize the story and to add it the local flavor. Because again, when people during the time accept ideologies or cultures from Hindu people coming from South Asia, they would also want to add their own flavor to it. They don't just, simply accept it wholeheartedly without changing anything. No, they alter things. They modify them to suit their own traditions, value systems, etc., etc. So the same thing happened to Maharaja Lawana. Ultimate question is, why is this evil character being revered instead of, the good guy? Usually in stories, you don't see a bad guy being revered, but in Maharaja Lawana, he is revered by these Maranao people. Well, I had that as an assumption, because when you sort of create a story, titling the story with the name of the character in the story, it goes to show that the main character is the one in the title. And it seems that Maharaja Lawana, being the evil character, is the main character here, because that's what our story is called, Maharaja Lawana.
Great. So, I mean, that's a wonderful note to take a pause, Dr. Magan. You've given so much food for thought. It's going to be very challenging to digest. I think one of the most interesting things that I took away from this conversation, because I don't think even you and I have focused on this in our conversation last year, that Philippines seems to be, to me at least now, the only nation state where the majority religio-cultural framework is Catholic, but the Ramayan is operating through a Muslim framework. Now, whether that is how close it is to the original, how close uh, even the deconstructed work is to the original ethos, because even in the original Ramayan, Ravan is not necessarily evil. Well, yes, in one manner of speaking, certainly, but he is more like the anti-hero. And we'll come to all that maybe in the next episode that we do, Dr. Magan. But interestingly, you see, in Thailand, in Indonesia and Malaysia, all the places that we have Ramayan adaptation, they work under the aegis of the dominant religio-cultural framework. So in Thailand, it's the Buddhist. Indonesia is the Javanese or Balinese Ramayan, so either Hindu or Muslim. Malaysia and so on. So I think that's my impromptu hypothesis, but we can discuss more about this. What a wonderful note you've struck, Dr. Magan. So I wish we could have more of this conversation today, but time, the old enemy, has rung the bell, and we'll have to close this conversation now here. But I hope we come back very, very soon, Dr. Magan, because the story has just started warming up. So we have lots of confidence. I hope you enjoyed this conversation,
I do.
audience. And Magan, I hope you enjoyed coming back to
My pleasure.
Kind of our show. And thank you so much for joining, Dr. Magan. I hope to see you very, very soon. Audience, I hope you liked our conversation. And the next one, I'm very confident is going to be very, very thrilling. So please stay tuned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee.